This is Rick Green with today's Constitutional Minute. This will be part 5 in our series on the Constitution and quarantines. And today we're going to be looking at the specific constitutional limitations on government actions when they restrict specific constitutional rights, such as freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, and the First Amendment, or even what's known as the freedom to travel based on the Privileges and Immunities Clause in Article 4, Section 2. So when governors start telling you that you must not leave your home unless it's for a purpose they deem essential, we better start asking if they have the power to do that. Now, I want to begin by just telling you, I'm going to try to be very careful today with my comments, because I am not one of these people that just looks for a chance to rant about the evils of government or try to rile people up, to go tar and feather some politician, okay? I try very hard not to be an alarmist. And yet, here we are. Most of the nation is on house arrest, with governors claiming far, far more power than any of us ever imagined the law would allow. We have quite literally quarantined the Constitution. We've turned our nation into a police state almost overnight. Now, before I get into the constitutional issues, please allow me just to share a little bit of my thoughts, a few thoughts on the growth of this crisis from a serious and significant health issue to now a global meltdown that quite literally threatens our way of life. It is that serious. So as we do that, don't forget, if you watched this video series and my first few videos on quarantines and the Constitution, you already know, look, I made the case for the proper use of quarantines, that it's a legit police power of government. I support it. I even disagreed with some of my civil libertarian friends on this because, to me, stopping an Ebola-like disease with a 50% mortality rate requires government intervention. I think our laws allow for that kind of thing, and our Constitution certainly does. But even when I made those first few videos, I also made the case for a balanced, scientifically based, economically rational approach to such intervention. And yet here we are. We've allowed governors and city leaders to seize power we never gave consent for them to have, and we've completely thrown out all reason and science in our hysterical response to the coronavirus. And I can hear the voices now, but Rick, wait, the science is why we're doing this. We're listening to the experts. No, we're not. We're not. We are listening to only a handful of the experts while ignoring all the rest. We're listening to and being influenced by the media that wants panic. That's who we're really listening to. And then the few experts we're listening to are the ones that, they've gone from warning us of millions of deaths to now maybe 100,000 deaths, and their only focus is flattening the curve. And I get that, but that's their only focus. That no end dates, no specific targets for the number of hospital beds or ventilators. It's all based on changing faulty, partial data with no consideration in their minds, no factoring in the number of deaths their recommendations will cause by killing the economy. The most I've heard out of them, I'm sorry, it's inconvenient. Well, meanwhile, other experts, many experts, they say, look at the data. Look at the facts. As the data has been pouring in, we are learning that about half the people that get this, they have no symptoms. They don't even know they have it, which is a problem in and of itself. I get that too. Makes them more likely to spread it. But half of them have no symptoms. And then 99% are recovering just fine. And most likely, once all of those with the virus are counted, not just those that are tested. Once we know how many actually have, or can even guess, we're going to have to guess, extrapolate how many actually have the virus, we're going to find the mortality rate, according to these experts, is going to be well under 1%. But even if it's 1%, look, even if it's quite literally 10 times the seasonal flu. Seasonal flu kills 40 to 80,000 people every single year. The flu death rate is usually 0.1%. So 1 in 1,000 that get it each year in and year out, will die. But we don't put that on the news every day. We don't have a ticker showing how many, in the tens of thousands every single year. We don't do that. But let's say COVID-19 ends up being 10 times as bad. That would then max out at 1%, which is tragic. It's awful. It could be hundreds of thousands. But it's not Ebola. It's not even the Spanish flu of 1918. Yet here we are. In the last 2 weeks, our state and local leaders have made what feels like a collective decision, falling all over each other to see who can shut down the most things. They've made a collective decision to destroy the best economy in history and throw millions of people into poverty while we give up virtually all of our constitutional rights. Why? Because of there being a 1% chance of dying. Now look, in the first part of the last century, our grandparents fought 2 world wars, the Spanish flu, the devastating polio virus with no vaccines, and yet there were no federal bailouts. There was absolutely no statewide government edicts to completely shut down the economy. None of that. Ever. Never. Never once did that generation think about just giving up and staying home. They didn't cower down and stop living life out of fear that they might die. Quite the opposite. They charged into battle. They charged into business. They charged into life with that American spirit that saved the world from Nazism and despotism and eventually even from communism. And now we're acting like the communists. You know, tough times reveal character. And just as tough times reveals the character of individuals, tough times for a nation, it will reveal whether or not she has strong character, if she has a strong principled foundation. World War I and the Spanish flu, we fought them at the exact same time with virtually no dip in the economy because we didn't shut down entire states. Our resolve brought us through those tough times and led directly into the roaring 20s. Then later, the Great Depression, polio, World War II, tough times. And yet the greatest generation never once thought about giving up. The strength of America's character led the world to victory and to even better days than they had before those tough times. Yet now, here we are. America's character is on display again. And it's very, very different. That once strong foundation of constitutional and free market principles, clearly it's been eroded. We see that erosion in our leaders, willing to twist their state statutes or just ignore them so they can seize power, never intended for a free society's leaders. We see it in the willingness of Americans to give up their liberty, indeed to criticize any public official that pauses to think for a moment and reason before taking such liberty. We see it in the shameful media mob creating fear and panic any way that it can. Instead of calling on American courage and ingenuity and resolve, we have told everyone, just stay home so government can save you. You know, we've complained for a long time about the snowflakes and safe spaces on campuses. But I'm afraid we've become a nation of snowflakes under this illusion that government can create a safe space for us and save us from death. It can't. In one of our first videos, I shared the quote from C.S. Lewis during the time that our nation was afraid of an atomic war, that we were going to have nuclear war, and it bears repeating right here. So I'm just going to read that exact same quote, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to replace where he says atomic bombs, so I'm going to replace that with the coronavirus because it fits even more now than it did 2 or 3 weeks ago when we made that video. Here's what he said. He said, and thank you to the folks over at the Gospel Coalition where I found this. He said, in one way, we think a great deal too much of the coronavirus. How are we to live in an age of the coronavirus? I'm tempted to reply, he said, why, as you would have lived in the 16th century when the plague visited London almost every year. Or as you would have lived in a Viking age when raiders from Scandinavia might land and cut your throat at any night. Or indeed, as you are already living in an age of cancer, syphilis, paralysis, air raids, railway accidents, and motor accidents. In other words, do not let us begin by exaggerating the novelty of our situation. Believe me, dear sir or madam, you and all whom you love were already sentenced to death before the coronavirus came around. And quite a high percentage of us were going to die in unpleasant ways. We had indeed one very great advantage over our ancestors, anesthetics, but we have that still. He said it is perfectly ridiculous to go about whimpering and drawing long faces because the scientists have added one more chance of painful and premature death to a world which was already bristled with such chances and which death itself was not a chance at all, but a certainty. This is the first point to be made, and the first action to be taken is to pull ourselves together. If we are all going to be destroyed by the coronavirus, then let that coronavirus, when it comes, find us doing sensible and human things, praying, working, teaching, reading, listening to music, bathing the children, playing tennis, chatting to our friends over a pint and a game of darts, not huddled together like frightened sheep and thinking about the coronavirus. They may break our bodies, but they need not dominate our minds. That was C.S. Lewis, and I'm sorry for being repetitive from one of our earlier videos, but it so fits right now. All right, enough of the personal commentary. I got to get to the constitutional commentary. Let's get to the Constitution part of this Constitution Minute that has already gone too long. Recall that I said in earlier videos, quarantines are constitutional, yet I couched that with the very important limitations that it has to be for the individual that has the disease or is suspected of having it. Never in our history, never have we used this police power for massive house arrest, essentially martial law without calling it martial law, of the entire country. Now, you can leave your house if you have your papers. In other words, if the government says it's okay for you to go to a certain place. But essentially, we're under martial law in terms of a house arrest that is across the board. So, as I said earlier, now it's the Constitution that is quarantined. No freedom of religion or assembly, no due process, no freedom to simply move about, travel, or just go for a drive to see the sunset, to have a little joy, to actually live in freedom, let alone go to your office and get some work done. I'm embarrassed to do this part. I've been bragging on our Texas governor for weeks because he had been using a reasonable approach to all of this, unlike all the other governors or many of the governors around the country locking down their entire states. But now he has also caved into this nonsense. And let me just read. I got to read one part from his executive order. This is in Texas, the beacon of hope. The governor said, whereas under Section 418.018C, the governor may control ingress and egress to and from a disaster area and the movement of persons and the occupancy of premises in the area. A phrase that in the past has only applied to a disaster area where a hurricane wiped things out and you had looting and crime or just incredibly unsafe. Or even you could theoretically say to an area where a disease has just totally infested and you have to close off that specific area to keep the disease from getting out. That makes sense. But now to take that phrase and say that you have control over the movement of every single one of the 30 million people living in Texas. Unbelievable. Anyone with the slightest modicum of historical knowledge knows that this clause is specifically for those disasters like I just described, not one where you don't even know if people have it or not, and half of them are not even going to be symptomatic, and 99% are going to be fine when it's all said and done. Now, look, I realize that Section 418.004, just a little above that, includes epidemic in the definition. I get that. So, for instance, when Ebola arrived in Dallas, Texas, back in 2014, the health commissioner and the governor at the time, Rick Perry, had every right to restrict the movement. That's what that means, the ingress and egress and the movement of people, to restrict the movement of that person with the disease or people that they had come in contact with. That's what that was for, and that's exactly what they did. But to even keep all of these powers in this section of Texas law in perspective, let me just read the list because I think it helps. Disaster in this statute means, and this is how most statutes across the country, this was kind of a trend. These disaster acts were very similar across the country. Disaster means the occurrence or imminent threat of a widespread or severe damage, injury, or loss of life or property resulting from any natural or man-made cause, including fire, flood, earthquake, wind, storm, wave action, oil spill, or other water contamination, volcanic activity, epidemic, there it is, air contamination, blight, drought, infestation, explosion, riot, hostile military or paramilitary action, extreme heat, cybersecurity event, other public calamity requiring emergency action or energy emergency. You get what we're talking about here. Devastating for the whole population type things. That's where you start controlling the movement of everyone in an area. Never have we tried to control the movement of everyone in the entire state. And look, I've looked into this. When this was passed in 1973, I went back to look at the legislative record, and I find no legislative intent that suggested it should ever be used by the governor to lock down the entire state to stop a respiratory virus. Now, if you can find committee testimony or House or floor debate and a speech that says that, please, I'm genuinely asking, please send it to me. I mean that genuinely. And in these other states where the exact same language was adopted, find me one legislator in the 1970s when these were adopted across the country and they did their disaster statutes. Find me one legislative record, one legislative event of a legislator saying that the intent was to empower the governor to shut down the entire state for something, even back then, if they had said as bad as the Spanish flu, that was what they were going to plan to do, let alone something not yet even proven to be that bad. And maybe there was such testimony. I haven't seen it. But even so, if one legislator said that was the reason, it would still be completely unconstitutional. So that brings us to the what is constitutional and where does it cross the line? And I'm sorry for going super long today, but here's the deal. Here's the basic constitutional test we all need to be thinking about as we watch these powers and we give up our constitutional rights, or at least most people are. Does the government have a compelling interest? And is their action, if they do have a compelling interest, narrowly tailored and least restrictive? Those are the key phrases. 3 things we need to look at real quick. First of all, is it a compelling interest? And yes, I think that part of this test was certainly passed once we saw the hospitals overrun in Italy and we saw the deaths in that nursing home in Washington State. You could definitely say that government officials had a compelling interest to take action, to try and stop or at least slow the spread of this virus. Okay, so that's hurdle number 1. Now, hurdle number 2, though, the next part becomes very important. Are the actions they're taking, are they taking them in a narrowly tailored way? It just simply means they're targeting their action at the problem itself that created the compelling interest. For instance, when a Liberian man tested positive for Ebola in Dallas in 2014, as I mentioned earlier, he was immediately isolated. He was isolated, and the people who had come in contact with him were quarantined. Now, that makes sense. That's narrowly tailored. But had the Dallas mayor shut down the entire city of Dallas and said, no one can go to work unless I say what your work is essential, that would not have been narrowly tailored, right? Now you're applying it to everyone when your problem and your compelling interest is specific. If the governor at the time had closed all of Texas and said, you're going to stay at home because I can control the movement of every human being in my state. If he had done that, then such a violation of your basic constitutional rights would not have been constitutional because you would not have been a threat that was creating the compelling interest for government to act. Okay, that's what we mean by narrowly tailored. So let's apply that to our current situation. The compelling interest is that the coronavirus spreads fast, and for a very, very small percentage of people, it can be extremely serious and deadly. So no one's arguing against us isolating anyone who tests positive and even quarantining anyone having contact with that person. We're not arguing against that. And because it spreads so fast and so many people have it that don't even know they have it, one can certainly argue that the compelling interest also says that you need to close large gatherings and that would still be narrowly tailored because the specifically large gatherings are known to spread the disease quickly. So that would still be narrowly tailored, but it doesn't prevent you from doing everything. So now we have this unprecedented step of closing all non-essential activity in the entire state and placing everyone on house arrest. Even if your city, you live out in some little town in West Texas and your city doesn't have a single case of the virus, even if your place of work is 3 people, 3 employees, and everybody works 50 feet apart from each other, then even you have to stay home. There's no exceptions. There's no narrow tailoring. This is completely across the board. Claiming that you as a governor have the power to control the movement of every single one of our 30 million people in this state is anything but narrowly tailored. It borders on delusions of grandeur. It should fail anyone's rational constitutional test. We haven't even gotten to least restrictive. That's just narrowly tailored, and we've already failed all of these governors, shutting down their entire states and killing our economy. So, but let's look at least restrictive so we know what that is, and because it does come into play here. Let's say the governors somehow convince all of us that every living human being in their state is an active threat to others. And that may be what the conversation is behind the scenes. They actually believe that. And so there is no least restrictive. Everyone might have the coronavirus. So the least restrictive action we can do is require everyone to comply with some orders. So maybe 6 feet social distancing, or wearing mask and glove if you enter a public place, or whatever. That would be restrictive, but it would be least restrictive, right? So they're looking for a strategy that would still narrowly tailored mean everyone, because somehow they're convinced that every single person is a threat, but yet it would still be applied in a least restrictive way. They could go that far and still consider it to be constitutional. But saying that you cannot leave your house except to go to the grocery store or the pharmacy, that's draconian. That's a true police state. That should never pass constitutional muster. That is not least restrictive. That is completely, almost completely restrictive. And in some places, they are going to make it completely restrictive and deliver groceries to you. So listen, I can already hear my email dinging, right? Somebody's going to say, "But Rick, we live in a new age that the founders could not have possibly imagined. I mean, now science is superior to your 200-year-old ideas of freedom. Now that we have all the answers to disease, we just need to trust the experts, and they will let us know when it's okay to go outside again, or to visit grandma, or to go to the park." Seriously? I mean, the experts, the scientists, they're just like economists. They disagree on what should be done right now. Many of them think this shelter-in-place stuff is actually the wrong move, because it's preventing the herd immunity that we need. It's preventing us from having more and more people go out there and get the virus so that they become immune to it. And so the experts are disagreeing on what the right strategy is. Right now, the strategy that everyone has adopted is to flatten the curve, buy time to buy the ventilators and the beds, and save more of those lives that fall into that 1% of the most vulnerable. And I've supported that from the beginning. We even self-quarantined our own family a month ago to help make that happen. And most people that could work from home voluntarily, I mean, even with having to make sacrifice financially and in so many other ways, volunteered to do that. We started doing that. Families all over the country started doing that almost immediately without being forced to do so. That's the kind of action that helps flatten the curve without flatlining the economy or killing the Constitution. But that wasn't enough for the powers that be. They decided that the only way to stop these idiot spring breakers was to punish everyone. Again, not narrowly tailored, but a pox on all houses. It's foolish. It's destructive. Most importantly, it's unconstitutional. And by the way, side note before I sign off, this is not something that would have surprised the founding fathers. This wasn't something they couldn't, that they couldn't imagine. They lived with this stuff. Yellow fever decimated Philadelphia. Smallpox was something they personally dealt with in the middle of the War for Independence. And yet even then, they did not put a pandemic or national emergency exception in the Constitution. We don't accept out our constitutional rights for a pandemic. They didn't see that come. Even living in pandemics, they didn't think that was the right way to do it. So we should not today let the left do that. We should not let them use this current situation to create an exception in our Constitution and change our way of life. I mean, next they'll use that exception for global warming or some other part of their radical agenda. In fact, Governor Newsom and other leftists are already saying they hope to do that they hope to use this crisis to reshape America, to remove, this is what they're hoping for. You read it, they're hoping to remove individualism and replace it with faith in the experts and reliance on big government. They want to implement universal basic income and socialist health care and government control of everything in your life. Don't let it happen. Not on our watch. The timeless principles of freedom, they don't change. The system of federalism designed by our founders, that's what gives us the best chance for dealing with these kind of situations. Just like we're facing right now. Let's stick to those constitutional principles and constitutional jurisdictions. Now is not the time to abandon the Constitution. Now is the time to defend the Constitution. So in closing, I'm going to ask you to do three things. I don't always ask you to take action, but these are quick and easy. First one's going to take you 60 seconds. Second one's going to take you 2 minutes. Now the third one will take a little bit more of a commitment. Here's the first one. Sign the petition on our website that simply asks our public servants to just pause for a moment and review your current strategy in light of the constitutional issues that we've talked about today. You've got the compelling interest. Are you doing it in the least restrictive, most narrowly tailored way? And then fall back to a narrowly tailored, least restrictive response rather than this across-the-board house arrest. We support the social distancing, no big gatherings, voluntarily working from home if you can, but we oppose the unprecedented, unconstitutional shelter-in-place or stay-at-home orders. If you agree with that, sign the petition. Help us encourage some common sense to our leaders. Look, they're scared just like everybody else. No governor wants to be the one that didn't do enough. So they're all doing more than they have the authority to do. So we as the people, we need to give them some cover. These petitions help give them cover to let them know that we support a more reasonable approach. So that's number one, sign the petition, 60 seconds. Number two, Patriot Academy needs your help. I'm just going to be blunt. I need your help. I personally need your help. We've had over 1,000 people sign up for our Constitution class in the last few days. Hundreds have signed up to be Constitution coaches and host their own classes. More than 200,000 have been reached with these constitutional minutes. The good news is that people want to know their rights. They want to know their responsibilities. And we at Patriot Academy, we're uniquely qualified and positioned to share these truths in an entertaining and inspirational way. We have a window of opportunity right now to train 1 million Americans in these principles right now during this crisis. But I need your help. I need your help. Our small team has been working around the clock to meet this demand, and the technology and all the things we're trying to do. We're simply out of bandwidth. We need finances right now so we can grow our team and serve people in excellence so that all of our systems work incredibly well. So simply I'm asking you to please consider making a donation at patriotacademy.com and do it today. I know it's tough right now. I know finances are tight for most all of us, but if you can make an investment in freedom, future generations will be grateful. So that's item number two. It'll take you about 2 minutes to do that donation online. Last action item, number three, a little bit more time involved here. I'm going to ask you to give 2 hours a week. I'm going to ask you to become a Constitution coach and host a class online with your friends and family. People from your church, your school, your neighborhood. It's a chance to create community right now online, which people are looking for. They're looking for ways to reach out and connect. And at the same time, you can be sharing and teaching and learning about the Constitution. Become a force multiplier and help save our constitutional republic. You don't have to have any experience in this. You don't have to know anything about these things. You can learn them as you're getting other people to come together and learn them as well. You can get started very easy, and it is literally free. Sign up today at constitutioncoach.com. Get your host license for free, and you can be hosting a class the very next day. We're in this together. I challenge you. Stay hopeful, stay joyful. I know I've been a little bit, passionate today about what's happening. I'm very upset with a lot of our public leaders that have gone too far, but nothing is new under the sun. It may be unprecedented in American history for them to do these things, but not in world history, and we can learn from that history. We can learn from our Constitution. We can definitely learn from that biblical worldview. Let's look at those things. Let's learn. Let's step back and learn from the context of history, but then let's step in. Let's step up, and let's do our part to save our constitutional republic. Visit us online today at constitutioncoach.com. I'm Rick Green. This has been today's Constitutional Minute.